Cold War was a time of great tension and rivalry. It lasted from the end of World War II in 1945 to the early 1990s. Instead of direct fighting, there were constant threats and a build-up of weapons. The two main superpowers were the United States and the Soviet Union. They had very different ideas about how to run the world. The United States believed in democracy and capitalism. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was a communist country. This clash of ideologies created a deep mistrust between the two superpowers. Each side believed that the other was a threat to its way of life. This led to a dangerous arms race, with both sides building up huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The Cold War had a profound impact on the entire world. The seeds of the Cold War were sown even before the end of World War II. The US and the Soviet Union had been uneasy allies against Nazi Germany, but their underlying differences were never far from the surface. The Soviet Union had long resented the West's intervention in the Russian Civil War in the 1920s. The US, for its part, was deeply suspicious of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's totalitarian regime. The devastation of World War II left Europe in ruins and created a power vacuum. Both the US and the Soviet Union sought to fill this void, each eager to expand its sphere of influence. The Yalta Conference in 1945, where the Allied leaders met to discuss the post-war order, exposed these conflicting ambitions. The US, with its commitment to democracy and free markets, saw communism as a direct threat to its values. The Soviet Union viewed the US as an imperialist power bent on global domination. This fundamental clash of ideologies fueled mistrust and suspicion. Both sides engaged in extensive propaganda campaigns, each seeking to win hearts and minds around the world. This ideological struggle played out on a global stage, shaping the political landscape for decades to come. As the Cold War intensified, Europe became the central battleground. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across the continent, dividing East from West. The Soviet Union consolidated its control over Eastern Europe, installing communist regimes in Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. The division of Germany became a particularly potent symbol of the Cold War. Berlin, the former capital, was located deep within Soviet-controlled East Germany. In 1948, Stalin attempted to force the Western powers out of Berlin by blockading all land access to the city. The US responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive humanitarian effort that airlifted supplies to West Berlin for over a year. The Berlin blockade and airlift marked a turning point in the Cold War. It demonstrated the West's resolve to resist Soviet expansionism and solidified the division of Europe. The Cold War cast a long shadow over the continent, shaping its political, economic, and social landscape for decades to come. The Cold War was punctuated by crises that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. One such crisis erupted in 1950 with the outbreak of the Korean War. North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea, which was supported by the United States and its allies. The Korean War was a proxy war, a conflict where the superpowers fought indirectly through their respective allies. Another major crisis occurred in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union began installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The US responded with a naval blockade of Cuba, and for 13 tense days the world held its breath as the two superpowers teetered on the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a sobering reminder of the stakes of the Cold War. It also highlighted the dangers of miscalculation and the importance of clear communication between the superpowers. The space race, a battle for the heavens. The Cold War rivalry extended beyond the Earth's atmosphere and into the realm of space exploration. The space race was a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union for technological superiority in space. It began in 1957 when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth. Sputnik's launch shocked the United States and ignited a fierce competition to catch up. The US poured resources into its space program, NASA, And in 1961, President John F. Kennedy set the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade. The culmination of the space race came in 1969 when American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission was a triumph of American engineering and a defining moment in the Cold War. It demonstrated the power of human ambition and the ability of nations to achieve extraordinary things, even in times of great rivalry. Culture, clash, propaganda and popular culture. The Cold War was not just a geopolitical struggle, it was also a battle for hearts and minds. Both the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in extensive propaganda campaigns, each seeking to win over global public opinion. Propaganda permeated every aspect of life, from newsreels and radio broadcasts to films and literature. The United States portrayed itself as a beacon of freedom and democracy, a champion of individual liberty and free markets. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, presented itself as a champion of the working class, a defender of social justice and equality. Popular culture also became a battleground in the Cold War. Music, literature, and art were all influenced by the ideological struggle of the era. Thaw and rephrase Détente and Its Limits. By the late 1960s, the Cold War began to enter a period of détente, a relaxation of tensions between the superpowers. Several factors contributed to this thaw, including the growing economic burden of the arms race, the rise of new leaders on both sides, and a mutual desire to avoid nuclear war. Détente led to significant agreements, including the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, treaties which aimed to limit the number of nuclear weapons held by the US and the Soviet Union. There were also increased cultural and scientific exchanges between the two blocs. However, Détente was a fragile peace. The underlying ideological differences remained, and both sides continued to support their respective allies and interests around the world. The Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 led to a renewed freeze in relations. Despite its limitations, Détente represented a significant shift in the Cold War dynamic. The wall crumbles, the end of an era. In the mid-1980s, a new leader emerged in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev inherited a stagnant economy and a demoralized society. He introduced a series of reforms known as glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or restructuring, aimed at revitalizing the Soviet system. Gorbachev's reforms had unintended consequences. They unleashed long-suppressed nationalistic and democratic aspirations within the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellites. In 1989, a wave of revolutions swept across Eastern Europe, toppling communist regimes and dismantling the Iron Curtain. The most iconic symbol of the Cold War's end came on November 9, 1989, when the Berlin Wall, which had divided East and West Berlin for nearly 3 decades, was breached. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War. The legacy of the Cold War echoes in the 21st century. The Cold War may be over, but its legacy continues to shape the world today. The ideological struggle between democracy and communism may have faded, but new rivalries and challenges have emerged. The proliferation of nuclear weapons remains a major concern, and the threat of terrorism has added a new dimension to international relations. The Cold War also left behind a world transformed by globalization. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the integration of Eastern Europe into the global economy have led to unprecedented levels of economic interdependence. The lessons learned from this era of rivalry and confrontation can help us navigate the uncertainties of the 21st century and build a more peaceful and prosperous future for all.